Y buenas tardes a todos y todas. Mi nombre es Irene de Padua y soy Policy Officer at Bioenergy Europe. So today I will present you a short overview of the Fit for 55 package and the challenges and opportunities that renewable heat solution can have on the follow-up of this. But before digging into the topic of the presentation, maybe just a couple of words on Bioenergy Europe, if you're not familiar with it. So as Pablo mentioned, Bioenergy Europe is the European Biomasa Association. We currently have around 180 members, including companies, associations, academia representatives, so we cover pretty much the whole value chain for the bioenergy industry. We are based in Brussels, and our goal is indeed to advocate for a better policy frameworks, so to have European policies, but also financial support for the further deployment of our sector. So let's start from a short overview of the European energy context. Because, as some of you may recall, at the end of 2019, the European Commission published its Green Deal, which is a strategy of economic and societal growth to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So it couples economic and industrial prosperity with sustainability. And the final goal is indeed to become carbon neutral by 2050. However, the Commission also assessed that we are not on track to reach this goal, and so that we needed to do more from here to 2030 to increase our overall targets, so for greenhouse gas emission reduction, renewables penetration, and energy efficiency. And that's where the Fit for 55 comes in, because the name means that we need to be fit for minus 55, which is the new target for 2050, greenhouse gas emission reduction. But if the final goal is carbon neutrality, which is the current status of the European energy mix? And I'm afraid to say that the answer is not of the most positive. Because if we look at heating and cooling, and you can see it in the graph, almost 80% of it is still supplied with fossil energy. And on a more positive side, bioheat is representing most of renewables in heating and cooling because it accounts for 17% of the total, while other renewables leave really a minority percentage. So this is not the best, I have to say, but on the other hand, it shows that we still have very much room for improvement to decarbonize heat and use sustainable solutions such as bioheat. And in this context, the Fit for 55 package touches upon very different sectors. Here you can see it touches on electricity, on industry, transport, buildings, and even forest legislation and agriculture. However, it's a package of 13 legislation, it's thousands of pages of legal documents, but today we will focus on three main directives, which I think are the most relevant for our sector. And in particular, the Renewable Energy Directive, of course, the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive, and also the extension on the EU Emission Trading Scheme, which is the actual carbon pricing mechanism for industry in Europe. And today I will focus in particular on buildings. And why is this? Because in Europe, buildings account for almost half of the energy consumption, and there as well, fossil fuels are still the main option. And in particular, if you look at the map here, you can see the heating system, which are older than 30 years, so from 1992 or even before of that. And the darker the color, the higher the percentages of this old system. So we're basically having 1 out of 4 heating systems in Europe, which were installed before 1990s. And I think this clearly shows the very urgent need to replace this system, to retrofit even old biomass appliances with modern bioheat ones, but especially to replace fossil heating with renewable sources. And that's where I think I would dig a bit more into the details of the directives, and I think it's important to start with the RED 2, or RED 3 actually, revision. Just to start, I think the focus of today's presentation will be renewable heating and cooling, but I think it's also important to take a step back and touch upon the topic of sustainability, because I guess you are well aware that biomass is quite under the spotlight for the issue of sustainability, and so I think it's important to remember why is biomass sustainability so relevant. Well, first of all, because biomass needs to be sustainably sourced to be accounted for the renewable energy targets and also the sub-targets. It needs to be considered sustainable to be eligible for public support, and also to be accounted as zero-rated under the EU ETS system, and so not to be accounted within the system. And to be considered sustainable, there are a set of 3 criteria, mostly the sustainability requirements to ensure that soil quality and biodiversity are guaranteed, the LULUCF requirements, which aim at maintaining or better increasing the carbon sink actually in Europe, and the greenhouse gas emission savings requirements, which basically establish a comparison with fossil heating, and biomass needs to prove that there is a consistent reduction in emissions. And this is the actual system. Of course, there are some exemptions to make this easier. And the first one is that for biomass fuel from waste or residues, only 2 criteria applies. So the sustainability and the greenhouse gas emission savings. And overall, sustainability criteria only applies to big installations. So those installations that are below 20 megawatt thermal are not accounted in the system, and they don't need to be compliant with the 3 criteria. And the last point is that indeed the energy efficiency criteria only applies to very big biopower installations above 50 megawatt. So as I said, this is the current situation. In the 5455, the Commission is suggesting to change this criteria. And here comes a little bit the problem, I would say. So the main changes proposed are to lower the exemption threshold, and so to apply biomass sustainability to all application above 5 megawatt thermal. And the second point is that the no-go areas are extended, because before they were only for agricultural biomass, and now they are extended to forest biomass. So this will impact highly biodiverse forests and carbon-rich environments. And the last point is that the proposal of the Commission includes new details on sustainable forest management, SFM, and new harvesting practices, which will make the management more complicated. On top of this, the proposal also includes restriction on granting support for biomass. So, for example, it excludes for support specific wood categories. Here you have a few saw logs, vineyard logs, stumps, and roots. And it also means the end of support for power-only installation. So power-only biomass, according to the Commission, should no longer be supported with subsidies from 2027. Of course, there are a couple of exceptions. So if the system uses carbon capture and storage technique, this is exempted. And also those territories which were identified as just transition ones. However, please note that this is just a proposal at this stage. So it's not the final version of the legislation. I think we will have another 1.5 years, 2 years of tough negotiation on this. So this is just what's on the table right now. But as I said before, I would like to focus on renewable heat, also because I think the situation there is a bit more optimistic, because the revision of RED 3 introduces higher targets for renewables, and in particular of 40% compared to the previous 32.5%. And it also includes some new indicative measures on the inclusion of renewables in buildings, setting a 49% benchmark, and also an increase of 1.1 percentage point of renewables in industrial sector. And now, these are both non-binding measures, so they are not mandatory, they are not legally binding at this stage, but I do believe that it's really important because there is an increased attention to renewable heating solution and the problem of heat decarbonization. And this is done in buildings, it's done in industry, it's done also in district. There is another article also for that. And the Commission will also issue these green products, so to label industrial products as sustainable, also based on their use of renewable energy, including biomass. But let's look into the specific article of the directive, and I promise this will be the only unknown specific one, which is Article 23. And this is the most relevant article in the directive for renewable heating and cooling, because it set the renewable heat obligations. So the news here is that there was already a target, but there as well was indicative. So member states should do something to increase renewables in heating and cooling. Now, with the new proposal, the target becomes binding. It's slightly lowered because heating and cooling is a national competence, so the European Commission does not have the complete responsibility on acting on that, but they decided anyway to make it binding, to make a strong step into the decarbonization of it. And the article also makes a list of possible measures that European countries will need to implement to achieve this target. And this can be from simply the physical incorporation of renewables, so more bioenergy, the promotion of heat purchase agreements, or even the planned replacement of fossil heating systems and milestones for their phase-out. So I think here is clear that there is an interest, there is a renewed attention on the carbonization of it. And another interesting point is that in the proposal, renewable heat installers are singled out. So the Commission recognized the fact that sectors such as ours do really need skilled workforce because they have quite some specificities. And it also introduces more transparency and a higher target for renewables in district, which on one end will be positive, because it will encourage member states to do more for renewable share in the energy mix of district heating. On the other hand, it could be it could mean an additional burden for district heating operators, because they will need to make more transparent their energy mix and show, for instance, the percentage of renewables in there. Moving on to the second directive I mentioned before, the energy efficiency one, I think this is also quite important because even though the focus is not on renewable energy, but it's more on efficiency measures, renewables still play a role even there. And here as well, we have an increased focus on buildings, and in particular on the exemplary role of public buildings, and new and higher objectives. And what I think is particularly relevant for today's presentation is a new definition of efficient district heating, because the Commission set a scheme for having a gradual increase of renewables in district heating until 2050, where there will be only renewables and waste heat as options. This is what is on the table right now. We do believe a better definition is needed, but it still shows this interest and this push towards additional use of renewables in districts. And here as well, information and awareness raising are quite one of the main focus of the directive. And it's also good to note that it establishes one-stop shops and single point of contact for the further implementation of renewable energy. And the last point on the EED, also because Pablo is looking at me and I may be going a bit late, is that there is an additional focus on vulnerable consumers. And the directive considers the option of using EU ETS revenues to compensate the external cost of the energy transition. Since I spoke about EU ETS, let's dig into the last of today's legislation, which is the extension of the existing carbon price mechanism, EU Emission Trading Scheme, ETS, to two other sectors, because at this stage, the ETS is only applicable to industry and just for companies above a certain threshold. What the Commission is suggesting is to have a parallel system, so complementary to the EU ETS, to reduce emissions on buildings and road transport. And the idea is to start this new system in 2026 and to use it to reduce emission by 43% by 2030. It will be a little bit of a different system from the other one because there won't be free allowances, so it won't be completely market-led, and it will not impact on households and final consumers. So it should take an upstream approach when the regulation is applied on supply chain, so the regulated entity. And looking at the revenues of this new system, all the revenues must be used for climate-related purposes, and in particular to favor the decarbonization of heat and road transport. And here as well, to look at vulnerable consumers and businesses, the Commission will establish a social climate fund with an initial financial support of €70 billion, on which member states should add on top another 72 billion. And this will be used at least by 50% to support low-income households. And to summarize a little bit, because I know I told you about a set of articles and measures and can be confusing. So the Fit for 55 has a set of obligations, because we have new binding targets for renewable heating and cooling, but we also have soft measures, so indicative targets for renewable in industries and in districts. And some incentives, for instance, for the Energy Taxation Directive or for the extension of the EU ETS for buildings, with the Social and Climate Fund that will indeed be a huge opportunity for our sector. And with that, I'm almost finished. Just if you found this interesting, I would like to point out two events that we're going to organize in the context of the EU Sustainable Energy Week. The first is organized with our international partner, and it's about delivering for 2030 and preparing for 2050. Whilst the second one is with our partners from the value chain, and it will focus on the sustainability, of course, and the nexus with energy integration. So how bioenergy can be a catalyzer of energy system integration. So more information on this will come. Please stay tuned. And having said that, muchas gracias por su atención. And Pablo, I give you the floor back.
Hello. No sé si tenéis alguna pregunta rápida. No vamos muy bien de tiempo porque a las 7 hay que acabar porque hay otra sesión. Pero si tenéis alguna pregunta rápida. ¿Sí? ¿No?
Lots of information.
Okay. I have one question.
Okay.
Easy one. So, how do you see the future for bioenergy?
Well,
With all this mare magnum of directives coming?
Well, I think it's going to be intense, both in a positive and in a negative way, because I think we have several challenges, especially on the topic of sustainability, because we are quite in the center of the debate at European level right now. But on the other hand, I think it's very positive, this new focus on renewable heat solution and the fact that bioenergy and other renewable sources can really play a key role in decarbonization. So I don't know how it will end, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be fun, if you pass me the term.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pablo.